everybody. Welcome back. We're on. Welcome to the Circle of Possibilities. And I have an awesome guest today. She's very impressive. I'm about to tell you about her, but first, I just want to say I'm in awe of this woman. So I'm just going to tell you about Jacqueline Friedland. She is a USA and Amazon bestseller of both historical and contemporary women's fiction. She's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and NYU Law School. She practiced as a commercial litigator for as long as she could stand it. I love that. After determining that office life just did not suit her, she began teaching at the Benjamin Cardozo School of Law in Manhattan and working on her first book. She soon returned to school to earn her Master's of Fine Arts from Sarah Lawrence College, graduating from the program in 2016 and publishing her first novel shortly thereafter. Her books have been awarded the 2020 and 2021 gold medals in fiction from Reader's Favorite and have been named a Best Indie Book of 2021 by Kirkus Reviews, as well as She Reads Best Book Club Pick of 2021 and a Women's Fiction Writers Association Star finalist for 2022. Jackie regularly reviews fiction for trade publications and appears at schools and other locations as a guest lecturer. Her fifth novel, which I have ordered, Counting Backwards, is forthcoming from Harper Muse in March of 2025, which means basically now, as you're listening to this, I think. Jackie lives in Westchester, New York with her husband and wait for it, 4 children, and wait for it again, and 2 dogs. Hello, how are you? Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many questions. So many questions. I looked at your bio, we talked, and I was like, okay, explain to me how you can do all of that at one time. But what started well, let's start by telling us what prompted you to start writing books after you decided that you didn't like practicing law.
So, I've always loved books and literature and language, and I actually was never passionate about going to law school, and that was just sort of a post-college responsible decision when I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I had been an English major in college, and when I went to see my favorite professor junior year and said, "I don't know what to do next. Do you think I should become an English professor, go get a PhD?" He told me all of the ways that I would suffer as an English professor. He said, most of the job would not actually be teaching. It would be writing articles and trying to get published and trying to get tenure. And if what you want is actually to be in the classroom discussing books, that would just be a very small part of your job. And even if everything works out the way that you want it to, when all is said and done, you'll be making very little money. So you have to make sure there's nothing else you might want to do before you go down that road. So I talked with my parents and they said, "Why don't you try law school?" But I missed the books from the first minute, and I always had this dream of being a writer, but I also thought it was a little bit like dreaming about being a rock star or a movie star. Like nobody actually does it. And then when I was actually working as a lawyer and staring down the barrel of my future in this profession that I didn't feel invested in at all, I said, "You know what? I better try this because life is short and either I'm going to do it or I'm not." And that was the motivation to escape the law.
Escape the law. So I'm gonna ask a couple of questions, which I think people are always curious about. You know, when they say when you're a great writer, you'll make a great litigator, you'll make a great attorney. Do you find that your great writing skills actually played a part in that success?
Well, I think the worst part for me of being a lawyer was that I was decent at it. I do think the writing skills made a difference. And I think even in law school, writing all of the exams are essay tests. And if you can write a clear and concise and well organized essay, you're right there. You have a leg up on, the people who majored in math and science and never got their writing skills up. And also, so much of the law is looking at laws are written with words, and so much of legal cases is looking at those words and trying to interpret them. And if you can show that they're open to multiple interpretations or ways that they can be applied in ways that are not the way the other side is arguing, that's effective. And so I do. I do think that it helped me, and I actually found the concepts in the law very interesting. It was just putting them into practice and being in the law firm and the types of cases that I was working on and, representing literal, tobacco companies fighting against each other for their placement of their products in 7-Eleven stores. Like, it was hard to be excited about that.
Yeah, I always wonder whether or not that plays a part. The kinds of assignments we get exposed to early on in the job, context. Had we loved the client more, had we loved the assignment more, that kind of thing. And I think I was at an event the other night, and it was your job is getting a job, and it was for marketing and advertising people in New York City from 212 NYC was the organization. They're a not for profit, and it was like, you guys have to understand that you can't go for every job. You have to go for jobs that speak to you because you will show up differently. And so your job didn't speak to you. So you did it. It was sort of like in French, there's an expression. It's sort of like we say it's trying to make a cat out of a dog or a dog out of a cat.
Yes, square peg in a round hole.
There you go. That's yeah. I have the apples and trees. We have cats don't make dogs rather than the apples and the trees, and we have trying to make a cat out of a dog for the square peg round hole. We have all those things. So your books are fiction. How do you find the inspiration for their contents? Because that's mind blowing.
So my books are I write both historical and contemporary fiction. When I started writing, I was sort of obsessed with historical fiction. I was coming out of, as a college student who had majored in English. I read all this Victorian literature and all like lots of early American literature, and I think I the work that I thought was of value was pertained to topics that were older. And so when I first started writing, I said, I only want to write a book I would want to read. So, of course, I'm going to do historical fiction. And I also felt like I was only like in my mid 20s, and I didn't yet have so much life experience that I felt I was able to write on anything contemporary. So, I've always been particularly interested in the pre-Civil War, like the antebellum time period in America. So that was where my mind went immediately. And I wrote this first story about the Underground Railroad, and it's a little bit of a love story and about a man in the South who is clandestinely an abolitionist. And um, it took me a really long time, and I did a ton of research, and I loved it, but when I finished it, it had taken so long that I actually had built up some life experience, and I said, "Now I'm gonna try writing contemporary fiction." And, my first book, though, while I was like, "Oh, I'm so experienced," I actually, looked to a story. The seed of that story was from something that my mom had been engaged before she married my dad, and it was a really interesting story about why they broke their engagement 3 weeks before the wedding, and I sort of imagined this whole other trajectory that her life could have taken, and that inspired that story. And then, going forward since then, everything else that I have written has been based on real news or a real life event that has piqued my interest for some reason, and then I sort of asked myself, like, well, imagine if that had happened, but it had been in a different geographic location or a different time period, or there had been one factor that was somehow changed, and how might that have played out? But for my contemporary books, I do largely get inspired by things I see in the news.
Well, you've got plenty to be inspired by now.
For sure.
I'm sorry. Couldn't resist that one. There's fodder for shit every day. Sorry, I can say that word because it's we don't beep over anything here. So the newest book, Counting Backwards, which I read the description on, and I'm fascinated. But tell us about it and what happened with that one.
So when I was in high school, senior year, my history professor, sorry, it was high school history teacher, gave us a project. Each student had to choose a different Supreme Court case from the early 1900s, and it was going to be we were going to be married to that case for the term and write a big project, a paper on it, and do projects. And I went over to the library and started thumbing through these really boring cases. And then I stumbled on this case called Buck versus Bell from 1927, where a young woman named Carrie Buck, who was 17 years old, was fighting in court because the state of Virginia wanted to sterilize her and prevent her from having any offspring because they deemed her feeble minded. And this was during the eugenics craze in America. And they thought that if she were to reproduce, any offspring would also be feeble minded, and that they were doing society this great favor by, weeding out the quote unquote flawed individuals. And what was crazy about the case is all these other cases had these lengthy opinions that, were horrible to read through. This opinion was like 3 paragraphs. And it was, yeah, it was it was like, it was so obvious to these great humanitarian justices who are still today considered great humanitarians in all other aspects of what they decided on. And they said there's a famous quote from the case: 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. And they sterilized this poor girl. And so I'm reading this case, as a 17-year-old myself. And then I discovered that, in fact, Carrie Buck was actually, all evidence shows, she was not in any, she was of average intelligence. She just was a poor girl on who didn't have much education, whose mother was potentially a prostitute. And they were both and then she actually got pregnant as a teenager before the sterilization, and the foster family institutionalized her rather than have an unwed pregnant girl in their home. So you can imagine the impact that this case, reading this, had on me, and it's just stayed with me for years. And then fast forward 25 years, it's 2020. I'm reading some website, and I see an article that's headlined "The Uterus Collector," and I'm like, what is this? So I click on the article, on the link, and it's a story about an immigration detention center in Georgia, an all-female facility where inmates there are claiming they're being sterilized without their consent, that they're being unnecessary medical procedures are being performed on them. And when they awake from these things, they're being told, oh, we had to remove your uterus, or we had to cut your fallopian tubes. So I'm like, I thought, it's 100 years after Carrie Buck. And I'm like, how can this possibly even be being alleged in America? So at that moment, I was like, this is my next book. This is what I'm writing about. So I dreamt up this character, Jessa Gidney, who is a young attorney, and she takes what is supposed to be, an open and shut pro forma, pro bono immigration case as a side project from her big fancy law firm. And when she goes into the detention facility, she begins to suspect that this sort of medical mistreatment is happening. And nobody believes her because, this would never happen in America. And nobody supports her. And so she goes on this sort of Erin Brockovich style crusade to, with only the support of her elderly grandmother, to help these women. And it's the story really of her getting to know the women and how she's jeopardizing her marriage, she's jeopardizing her career, and all of the ways that taking the case impacts her personal life, and what happens with the women.
Wow. Holy smokes. I sent it to my friend Maureen, who is a book club, aficionado. Hope she's going to probably listen to this podcast. And she's been running in this book club for 25 years. And they're always, I said, dude, this is your next book. And I sent you the link to your book. I'm like, this is your next book. She's saying, oh, I haven't heard of this author, but she's gonna, we're gonna talk about her. I said, absolutely, absolutely. So that brings me, talking about the impact of her personal life. Let's talk about yours. I mean, for our listeners, we have a lot of women in leadership who are, juggling the proverbial balls in the air and hoping that nothing drops and so on. So I feel like you're the masterclass juggler.
Thank you. Although I've never been good at ball sports.
Same, girlfriend, same. I'm into the solo sports. Martial arts is good, I'm good. So, during the course of all right, so you left the law, you started writing. At that point, you had 1 munchkin,
Correct.
and then you had more munchkins close in time. So, tell us what that journey was like. That it's fascinating.
So thought I would start writing my first book when my first child was born. And I realized still a lawyer, and I got this wonderful 3-month maternity leave. And I said, this is perfect. I'm going to write my book. And, then my whole life is going to change. And little did I know, putting aside the fact that, of course, most humans cannot write a book in 3 months, I could not put I didn't know anything about parenting yet, and I had one of those babies that could not be put down without howling. So, I couldn't take a shower, much less think about writing a novel. So, I was lucky, if I got a few hours of sleep each night. But it was at that point that I was committed to the idea. I thought that had been my plan, and I am a planner. And so I did my best to write on weekends and when, as he got a little older, when he was napping and things like that. But I was also like a young married person. And during that period of time, we had 4 kids in 6.5 years.
No, you had 4 kids in 6.5 years, let's be clear.
Yes, 4 kids in 6.5 years. But I actually say I think it's really nice for the kids to be so close in age, and if I had it to do over again, honest truth, I might have had them even more closely together because
Seriously?
you know what? When babies are hard, no matter what, when you have a newborn baby, it's gonna be hard, so you might as well just, cram it into as short of a time as you can, and then if they're very close in age, they want to do the same activities at the same
That's a
time, and
good
it's
point.
really it allows for a lot of togetherness, which is
That's
really
true.
lovely, but it didn't allow for a lot of time to work. So, I did, I went part-time as a lawyer, and then that kinda became too much. I felt like I wasn't giving my all to parenting, and I also wasn't giving my all to the law. And so then I started teaching at Cardoza, and that was great, but it was also sort of part-time. And when I got pregnant with my fourth child, my sister, who's also an attorney, kind of gave me a talking to, and she's like, "You've got to figure out what you're doing here. Like, do you think that you can really be a full-time attorney with 4 kids when, once they're a little older? Or do you want to figure?" And that was the moment where I said, this was never my dream. It's still not my dream. And that was when I decided to apply to go back to school. And I actually found being in school while having little kids fairly doable. Writing programs they're almost like a part time program. There's just not that much class time. So much of it is work at home. So I was able to adjust and write when kids were in preschool and when they were napping and things like that. And I managed when my youngest started kindergarten, that was when I managed to get my first book published shortly thereafter.
So how that process that was also a learning process. You had to go and do a book pitch and do the whole thing.
Yes. So the first book, there's a very standard advice people give about how to get your first novel published. You're supposed to first step write the book. You can't, call up an agent and say I've had this great idea and what do you think? You first have to write the book. Unless, there's always the exception, but 99.9% write the book. Then you have to find an agent. The way you do that is you write a one-page letter, and it can't be more than a page, and it has to say who you are, what your book's about, why you were the right person to write that book, why they are the right agent to represent that book, and why they're absolutely going to love this story and a little bit about what it's about, all on a page. So I get that done. And then I go searching for which agents, are going to seem like the right people. And I start sending the book around and I'm getting all this positive feedback. And it's all very lovely because it's dribs and drabs. You have to send first 10 pages, then send another chapter. And so they sort of string you along. And I would go through this whole process with one agent after another who then told me that my book, oh, they all said the same thing. This book is not quite historical fiction and it's not quite historical romance. It's somewhere in between. And so I wouldn't know, a bookstore won't know where to shelve it, and I wouldn't know how to sell it. So you should rewrite it and send it to me. During this process, it's like this soul crushing, you think you have this great thing. I found out that at small independent presses, you don't need an agent. So I just took a chance and sent it off to one, and they got back to me pretty quickly. Loved it, said it's a little too long, cut out 27,000 words, and we'll do it. So 27,000 words is a lot of words.
It's a lot of words. I think my book is 50 something thousand.
But it was too long because it was about, it was like 127,000 words, which it's not supposed to be. You're supposed to stay under 100,000, which I did not know at the time. So I did what they said and actually cut a little more. And that became my first book. And I actually really loved working with an independent press because I did my next 3 books with them as well. Because I didn't have the heart to go through this process again. And I was very happy with the working with this publisher. I felt I had a lot of editorial input and control over the work. I had input on the cover design. I spoke regularly with the head of the company. I felt good there, and I felt like there were other authors I respected using them, and I was doing well. I mean, one of my books hit the USA Today bestseller. One became a number one historical fiction seller on Amazon Kindle. So I had zero complaints. But I, with my newest book, a friend of mine who's a writer said, I'm just going to give your book to my agent, and not my new book, my one of the old ones that was already published. And I was like, okay, go for it. And the agent called me after she read it and said, I'd like to represent you. And I said, that's so lovely, but I don't have a book written. I was sort of, between projects. And she's like, no, no, that's fine. Write whatever you're going to write next and then give it to me and we'll work on it together. I said, great, because why not, right? And so she's been awesome. She sold my book to Harper Muse, which is who's publishing book number 5. And this is my first time working with a traditional publisher. And I have to say, I was nervous after horror stories I've heard from other authors, but so far it's been like completely lovely. And I'm really enjoying it. And I'm so excited about this book and, having this new experience.
Yeah, listen, I as long as they market it for you or help you market it, because I feel like what I'm told in traditional is that they're asking you to leverage and do your own marketing anyway.
Yes. Well, there is definitely an expectation on the part of the author that you're going to be on Instagram and you're going to be posting and you're going to be telling everyone and doing what you can to, cuz also with in the past, I don't know, a decade or give or take, that the market has gotten so saturated. There's so many books, and you have to it's very hard to get heard above the noise even if your publisher is doing everything they can.
Yeah. Can you hold up the book for everybody to see and then explain? So this is counting backwards, and there is a beautiful it's pink and red and shades of that, and there's a pomegranate opened up with seeds flowing out of it. Entree to explaining that if you'd like.
When the publisher sent me the cover design with this pomegranate, I thought, well, I like pomegranates, but there's nothing in the story about pomegranates. What's the scoop? It turns out that the pomegranate is an ancient symbol of fertility, which I did not know. And that in and of itself, I think would have been enough for me to say, excellent, let's use this cover. But I also, if you look at it, it also looks like it has 4 separate chambers. When to look at it reminds me of a heart, just and it's so that felt fitting for a story like this too, where there's, a lot of medical jargon and also a lot of relationships and family talk and feelings. And making it even more interesting is that a pomegranates hold interesting significance in Judaism because they say that a pomegranate has 613 seeds, which is the exact number of commandments in the Torah. And there is, given the eugenics thread in the story, there is also parts of the story relevant to Judaism and how eugenics affected, many generations of Jews. So for all those reasons, the pomegranate just felt like the perfect.
That was really well thought through on their part, I thought. Really, like, very high level thinking and representational graphic. And as a marketer, I totally love that stuff, so
Now I just wish there were a pomegranate emoji.
we'll make one for you, no problem. So, I mean, what would you say to a woman who is looking at her career and knowing that she has a passion for something else? I mean, you had the good fortune to be able to do it because it didn't sound like your children would not be fed if you didn't continue being a litigator. So, that was a positive. Great. And let's say a woman is listening to this, and a lot of our conversations are about pivoting and doing what our hearts are telling us to do, and so on. What would you say to that person who's struggling or at that pivot point?
So I have a lot of thoughts on this, though, so I'm gonna try and distill them. When I actually was a teenager, one of the careers I had suggested to my mom for myself was being a writer, and she said to me, "You're a very social person, and that's gonna be so much time by yourself. Wouldn't you rather maybe be in an office and be with people?" That landed on me, and it impacted my decision. Side note, I actually find that I have more colleagues and peers as a writer and a ton of social interaction. It forces me to be an extrovert in ways that I never expected, sitting on podcasts, speaking to large crowds, etc. But I think that my point is that I think every job has parts to it that you're not going to love, and that's the first thing. Don't let people talk you out of your passion by telling you, well, if you want to be a teacher, you're going to have to spend time sweeping the floors, at the end of the day. That's number one. Number two, like what my English professor, who I did really adore, said to me, he told me all the hard parts of the job. I think everything is hard. If you want to be good at something, it's going to be hard. And you have to be committed to doing the work. And I think that story of how I got an agent and how I ended up at a traditional publisher, I mean, it was 2004 when I said I want to write a book. And now in 2025, I'm publishing with an imprint of HarperCollins. So I think a lot of the point is that you have to be prepared to be in it for the long haul, and also just keep going. It's like Nemo, just keep swimming. Regarding, if you want to make sure your children can eat while you're doing this, find time on the side. If where there's a will, there's a way. And if it's going to take you double the time or triple the time because you have to keep your day job that you hate, do it anyway, because the time is going to pass, and better to be doing whatever side hustle thing you're planning than watching another episode of that TV show. So that's my advice.
Yeah, that's absolutely the advice. We only get 24 hours in the day. You are pissing something away. Trust me. If you do an analysis of your time, whether it's scrolling or it's binging, you are not optimizing what you say you want.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
Yeah, that was the big part of the retreat that I just did in October was getting clarity around how we truly spend our day and what it is that you want to have happen in the near and longer term future and what you need to reverse engineer in terms of your time that's going to get you there because wishing it or even saying it doesn't mean
What I find helpful also is creating deadlines in your head, saying like, I'm trying to do this thing. If it doesn't happen in the next 3 months, I'm going to change my strategy. Otherwise, you just end up doing the exact same thing with the same results indefinitely. So you have to put a limit on how long you're going to try plan A.
that's great. I love that. So if plan A doesn't work by X date, we're going to plan B. That's the default. Boom. You already know it. Love it. Love it. I love that. So, what did you personally have to do to get yourself through the process? Did you have that plan A, plan B? Like, how did you do it at night while the kids were like you said something about when they were younger, the more recent books when they were older and didn't require what I call the hands-on, but yet they require a different kind of attention. How did that work? Like, how did this most recent book?
So luckily, I now my kids are all in full school. So most days, well, the goal on every day of my calendar on weekdays when they have school, I try to leave open for writing. And of course, somebody's always breaking an arm or having strep throat, or you name it. Like there's always another fire drill that has to be put out. But because of that, I so rarely will make any other plans during the day because I have to safeguard my time. Otherwise, I will not have it to write. And I think a lot of friends don't understand that I can't meet them for lunch. I can't meet them for coffee because I need that time because so much of my other time is taken up by the kids. And so otherwise I'll never get to write. Not to mention I have my own dentist appointments to go to and things like that. So I am very protective of my time, and I have a lot of friends who I adore, who I wish I could see more of, but don't. And we still, get together enough that I maintain the friendship. So I think somehow you have to strike that balance. And I think I learned a lot. My mom was a professor, which I think she was a professor of special ed, and she's recently retired. And she said to me the other day that she's struggled to adjust to being retired because she is like me and always going. And now she's always going with social plans with friends. And she said it's very different to she's no longer just squeezing her friends in where she can. She's actually able to just relax, and enjoy. And it's a very different feeling. And I do look forward to that. And I hope I live long enough to get there. But I also feel like I'm not at the stage in my life where that's what I feel is my priority.
That's right. Yeah, how old is your mom?
76.
Yeah. So I say this a lot is you can have it all, but you just can't have it all at the same time.
Exactly.
There's ebbs and flows of priorities that you have in different life stages, and what you can do as an empty nester, you can't do when you have little people. What you can do as a retiree, you can't do and I do think though, there is some perception, I don't know what it is, that like writing is, that's just like something you do on the side. You just do that on the side. It just happens magically. I'm like, no, it does not happen magically. You have to sit in front of a freaking computer for hours.
I agree, and I actually have to say that one of my biggest pet peeves is when people are they're trying to be nice, and they say to me, "How do you do that?" And I wanna say to them, like, "How do you sit there and just, like, how do you write all these books?" I wanna say to them, like, "How do you go to your job?" It's my job. It's not my side hobby. It is my career, and that's, the same way that everyone else gets up and goes into their office, I get up and go to try to do my job.
It's so funny because one day I remember this, my kids were little and I rarely did I pick them up myself because I had a nanny because I worked full time, had a business, whatever. And one of the moms says to me, "Are you still doing that that design work from your house?"
Oh god.
I was like, You mean the thing that feeds my family thing? That thing? Yeah, that. Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of still doing that." I'm like, "Oh my God." Needless to say, we were not fast friends. How do you think that being a mom of 4 impacted how you became a great writer?
So I think that this is my second book that it has to do with reproduction. And I actually am percolating on another one for the future. That's a totally different element of reproduction. I find I find the biology of reproduction fascinating. I find genetics fascinating. And I also, there's this big push in the publishing industry right now in the past couple of years that all books should be written by people who can speak to the experience of whatever the characters are going through. So for example, if you heard of the book American Dirt, so that author got a lot of negative feedback because he wrote about the experience of immigrants coming up to America through Mexico, and now it's not her experience, and it started this kind of backlash against her. And so have I been in a detention facility as an immigrant? No, but I have known what it is to want to be a mother, to worry, am I going to get pregnant, am I not, to know, I know what it feels like to be separated from a child. I know what it feels like to argue with a husband, not often, but sometimes. So I feel that I gravitate towards family relationships because that is something that has been central to my life. And it's the thing I think about most personally. And those feelings, I think the feelings of being a mother and or wanting to be a mother are unique to women, obviously, and they're just this unusual part of the human experience where, I read recently that from the minute you have a child, you start to grieve. It's all these feelings of grief because you're always worried. It's from minute one, what's going to happen? Will they be okay? Are they going to be a success? Are they sick? Whatever it is. And there's fear, and yet you're so happy and you want it so badly. And so I just find that whole mix of feelings and the chaos of it so interesting. So I think that's how it's impacted my writing.
That's so awesome. Really, really awesome. What's your stance on work-life integration? Now, I notice I never say balance because I think that's horseshit. I always say integration because it is an integrated part. It's sort of like a pie that you what's your stance on that? Like, what do you tell people?
I mean, my stance is that what different people need different amounts of it. I was from the time I was a little kid, I was told like you're a brain and you have to work hard and use what you've got. And my mom was very much, she raised me to be a scholar and a worker. And so I don't feel good if I am idle. If I have, I could take a week's vacation and that's lovely because it's not the norm, and then I come back and I'm back to work. But I also know that that's not the same for everybody. I mean, they call it work for a reason. Not every, it's not pleasure. And so I think you have to find what suits you. And for me, I think if you want to have time to have a lot of family time and a lot, I think you need to prioritize family, social, exercise, whatever else is on your list of things you want to do. And then, you know, what I think is actually really great about modern day society is that we are so much more flexible than we used to be. People work from home, they work in the middle of the night, and sort of, you can come up with a new idea that's not been done and find a way to make it happen in a way that the 1950s didn't allow. And so I think that you have to just, figure out what your priorities are, how much extra time you have, and how you will be happiest about using it.
Ooh, I love that. Love that. There we are so aligned. I can't tell you. So what would you tell your 30-year-old self if you had the opportunity to talk to her, whisper in her ear?
Oh, that is such a good question. I think I would tell myself to just keep going, to keep writing, to have patience, and that if you are dedicated enough, you can achieve what you're going for. I mean, there's a quote I used to love: "If the dream is big enough, the odds don't matter." And I actually have loved that quote since college, and I refer to it in my mind, not infrequently. There's one other one, which is big shots are just little shots that keep on shooting.
I love these. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna definitely put these out there. That's gonna be like your caption.
But I think, it's like she persisted, right? I just you have to just keep going and not give up.
Yeah, that's it. You gotta do the work, no matter which way. That's awesome. Thank you so very much for being here with us. This has been a pleasure. For those of you who haven't checked it out, I really want you to go on Amazon or go to your local bookstore or go online, wherever you want. Counting Backwards, Jacqueline Friedland. She is awesome. And she's written 4 other books that you will find by virtue of finding Counting Backwards, which sound like I need to order as well. So thank you for being here. And remember, make it a great day. I want you to give us some feedback. Let us know what you think. Definitely subscribe and follow. We look forward to seeing you again. Bye bye. Thank you so much for listening to Possibilities with Monique DeMeo, where we unpack life as a female mover and shaker. If you like the show, please consider liking it, or better still, subscribing to it and leaving us a rating. It truly does help. Also, you can pick up my book, The 7 Secrets to Creating a Life You Love, a practical guide for women in leadership. You can find the book, other episodes of this podcast, and how to stay in touch at MoniqueDeMaio.com. DEMAIO. I look forward to seeing you again soon. With gratitude, Monique.